Welcome to another video here at Back to Classics, and today we're going to discuss this 1973 Ducati 350 Desmo we're restoring. And this is one of the ultimate Ducati singles they ever made in the early 1970s. And that links back to a previous video we did on the Marianna, which was the absolute first of the singles. So let's first dive into the history behind this model and how it all came about. So as I said in a previous video, we discussed the Marianna, the absolute genesis of the Ducati singles, created by Fabio Taglioni back in 1954-55, and that spawned a whole range of models. It goes way too far to name all of these models that followed the Marianna and all the street models, starting with the 175. Well, we can put a whole range of bikes in there. Well, the first era of Ducati singles, that's what we now refer to as the era of the narrow case engine with a different frame. So basically all these different models that were available for the street all had the same basic layout of the engine and the frame, and there were a lot of different models. Later on in 1968, the limitations of that frame were felt, and also the need to increase the capacity of the engine, which was at 350 at that time, and there was a need for a larger displacement, which is why Ducati decided to develop the 450 version of the same single-cylinder engine. So that came about in 1968 and was introduced at the same time with the new frame, which we now refer to as the wide case frame. Now, we did a video about the Scrambler and the Scrambler models, which we can link here as well, where we discuss the background of that Scrambler model. But the more sportier models that were available in the late 1960s and early 1970s, they first received the Desmo cylinder head as well. So let's dive into that a little bit. 1968, and Ducati introduced their new range of single-cylinder models, and now was what we refer to now as the wide case models. So what they actually did, they also made a sort of a top-of-the-range bike, series of bikes to include the Desmodromic valve actuation in the cylinder head. Now, Ducati had been using Desmodromics in the racing bikes previously, but never there was a street model with Desmodromic valve actuation, and that became the first in 1968. Now, that what it does, normally, of course, the valve are actuated by a valve rocker to open it and a valve spring to close it again, and what Desmodromics do is they not only use a rocker to open it but also one to close it, as we can show you in pictures here. The advantage being that at higher revs there is not a risk of valve float, so the valve springs are not actuating fast enough, and also to give the opportunity to tune it in a more specific way, especially the overlap between the inlet and exhaust valves. So that's the advantage of Desmodromics that you have there. So 1968 was the first time Ducati introduced this for a street model, and that was done on the Mark III Desmo, available in 250, 350 and 450 cc displacement. So that's the 1968 model. That was continued in 1969 with a slightly different color scheme, but still retaining these very specific twin filler cap on the fuel tank, which is now a very sought after item on these early Desmos. For 1971, that was replaced by the silver shotgun, as it is called now. Of course, that bike had its name because of that very specific metal flake silver bodywork it had, fuel tank, seat and side covers, really setting it apart and very distinctive for the early 1970s. That model, however, was only made for 1 year, and the next year in 1972 they approached Leopoldo Tartarini to link the design of the single cylinder more closely to the now also introduced 750 V-twin. So Leopoldo Tartarini, for those who saw the video on the Marianna history that we made, a known name because he was a racing driver from the early 1950s and also for Ducati in the 1955 MotoGiro. Unfortunately, he crashed and got injured in that race, effectively ending his racing career. But he went on as a guy working for Ducati, showing the world how reliable these little 175cc Ducatis were when he did a huge trip around the world on a 175 Ducati. And later on he became a dealer in a dealership for Ducati in the Bologna region, and also set up a company called Italjet, designing motorcycles and scooters and etc. And he was approached in 1972 by Ducati to make a design of the newly designed 750cc twin for the 750 Sport. And that is kind of what I can show you here. So in the same year, 1972, it was thought to link the product lineup of Ducati, so to speak, the two bikes, the 750 as a big sister, and the range of Desmo singles, 250, 350 and 450, all available in that year, to have the more or less the same color scheme as the 750 Sport, effectively creating what we now call the Yellow Desmo. And this obviously is one of those final singles that Ducati made in the early 1970s. Like I said, it was available in 250, 350 and in 450 version. Effectively the same bike with some very minor differences. Still in 1972 and 73 it got the drum brake, front drum brake, to be replaced by the absolute final version in 1974 that received a Seriani front fork and also a Brembo disc brake on the front. And that was effectively the last of the Ducati singles that we saw to come out of Bologna. Because the whole of the product range, now of course also they had the 750 twin bikes that were available, later created the 900, but the platform that was so successful since 1955 now came to an end, and the Ducati management decided not to continue with single cylinders, but instead going into parallel twins that were developed in that year as a replacement of the single cylinder. Now that was very much against the will of Fabio Taglioni, and I can see why, because that whole parallel twin endeavor never was very successful, and one could argue why Ducati never went on to create another single cylinder model, apart from that one time in the early 90s when they did this Super Mono, which was a highly special bike that was available only in very, very limited numbers. Ducati never made a single cylinder model again. And well, that's something I sometimes wonder what it could have been if Ducati just made a upgrade, a new version, designed a new version of the single cylinder engine to replace this one back in 1974-75. But of course that never happened, and we're now dealing with one of the final single cylinder models right here. So this specific 1973 Ducati 350 Desmo, it was brought to us in boxes and well, crates where all the parts were disassembled already, apart from the engine that was still together, but unfortunately the whole project came a bit too soon for our video channel to include the build up to this point. But what we did so far, we did a lot of work on the engine that has been completely rebuilt already. New conrod, new piston, valve guides, valve seats, a lot of things there, of course, new valves, gearbox all checked over, and well, that's all been put together very nicely and is now done. And as you can see, we have received all the parts back from painting. Frame is newly painted. The fuel tank, which had a huge dent in there, it's all been repaired and now newly painted and good to go. So we're just about to start with the final assembly of this bike, and well, we'll definitely include another video about this bike when it's coming together, as well as probably a video about us taking it for a drive to see how it performs on the road. So that's up for our next video. This concludes this update on this project and a little bit about the historic background of the Yellow Desmo. We hope you very much enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Toodaloo-dokie. See you next time.